All right, my apologies being a little late. We will call this meeting to order. If we can get a roll call, please, Cliff.
Perales,
Here?
Jimenez. Here. Carrasco. Here. Jones. Arenas. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And no items being recommended from staff on the work plan. If my colleagues don't have any changes there, we'll go down to the consent calendar.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a
Excuse
second.
me, Chair, we actually need to request a sunshine waiver. I'll have our finance director explain what it is for.
Thank you. Is this under the work plan or under the consent
This is
calendar?
under the consent item.
Okay, thank you. We are there. Yes, we made it.
Hear you up top. Okay, Julia Cooper, Director of Finance. So we're requesting a sunshine waiver on a portion of the first quarter financial reports. It's the investment report that was attached, initially attached to the packet, didn't have the attachment included with it, and the attachment includes a listing of all of the portfolio earnings at all the portfolio holdings as of September 30th, and also the AUP agreed upon procedures audit from the auditor. All the information that was contained in the body of the report, none of that changed. So we just need a sunshine waiver because the attachment was missing.
I think we just got that either today or yesterday, right?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it was this morning.
This morning. Okay.
So
Okay. So do we need to incorporate that into the motion?
Yes.
Okay. So, but we can incorporate all into the same motion.
First, you need the sunshine waiver motion.
First that.
And
Okay.
then the motion on the item itself.
So if I can ask for then first a motion on sunshine waiver.
Second.
We have motion and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. And now we can take a motion on the consent item.
Move to approve the consent item.
We'll do it again. Motion and a second on consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. So now we'll move down to item D1, the report from our police department, operations and performance bi-monthly status report. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Cook. I'm the Lieutenant in Command of the San Jose Police Department Research and Development Unit, and I'm here to present the Police Department's bi-monthly report, bi-monthly operations and status report. So if we look at slide 1, this is just a summary of the items that we're going to cover today in the bi-monthly. We'll start, as we always do, with our citywide crime statistics, and we'll talk a little bit about crime trends, which will include an update on some lewd and lascivious statistics that were asked for at the special meeting last week. Under emerging issues, I'm going to explain a program that we're using to reduce illicit firearms possession in the city. And under other matters of interest, we're going to talk about our future plans for how we're going to report out on sexual assault response strategy during the bi-monthly reports going forward. Okay. Now, who needs animations? All right, so if you look at our numbers here, we've got our homicide rate today is 26 compared to 22 last year. We've talked a bit about this, although that looks like a big change. Actually, 26 is a perfect match for the 5-year average, and it was last year that was the anomaly. Our rape numbers are higher this year again than last year by 10.9%. The 5-year average on that would be 400. And our robbery numbers continue to be down over last year, but they're very comparable to the 5-year average. Aggravated assaults are up. And if you look at our property offenses, we've had a 10% drop in burglary, a 10% increase in larceny, and a 23% drop in vehicle theft. And if you look at that vehicle theft number, that's particularly telling because you'll see that even when compared to the 5-year average, we're significantly lower than we have been in the past. We've had a very good year in our vehicle theft areas. Total property crime is down 3.8. Our total violent crime is up 3.2. And overall, there's a 2% drop in UCR crime stats year to date. So I'm going to move forward on to a discussion of some statistics that were asked for last week. On the 12th, the department shows some statistics discussing arrestee demographics with regards to the arrestee's race and a breakdown of arrestee adult versus juvenile arrestees. The council asked us if we could come back and show also the suspect data. So if you look at this slide, this is a slide that you folks saw last week. And you'll see that if we compare, these are the people for lewd and lascivious. This is 288A, so these are our lewd and lascivious on victims under the age of 14. This is a time year period from the beginning of this year until the end of September. And this shows arrestee demographics. So you can see the racial breakdown, and you can see, if you look at the orange, that depicts how many of those arrestees were adult, and the blue depicts how many of those arrestees were juveniles. And that, like I said, this is the one you saw last week. And in response, we've added this slide here that talks about suspect demographics. And so it's the same configuration where we're using orange to show you who the adults are and blue to show you who the juveniles are, and then doing a racial breakdown for child molest of victims who are 14 years and under. And I'm just going to flip back and forth here a couple times between these two, and you'll see that the racial makeup and the juvenile adult breakdowns are tracking. I'm going to try to go back and forth here. Suspect, yeah, are roughly similar. They're not exact matches, pardon me, but they're roughly similar. And you're going to see the same thing when we talk about the numbers for rape. You guys asked for, I'm sorry, the council asked for a comparison of suspects after having seen this slide, which is the arrest breakdown, which again, in the same fashion, is breaking down adult versus juvenile, and a racial depiction of, I apologize, how do these all look the same? There we go. So this is arrest data. This is the data you folks saw for 261 rape, and you can see the breakdown here on arrests. Now, when you look at the next slide, which is going to show suspect, again, we have similar breakdowns, although in suspect you're seeing a lot more raw numbers in suspect, and that's representative of the fact that every time we take a crime report, we're going to list what we think the demographics of the suspect are, but that does not always result in an arrest. So you see the raw numbers are bigger when you talk about suspects than when you talk about arrestees, which was on the previous slide. So smaller numbers, but very similar trends in the breakouts. And so those are the numbers we were asked for on that particular. And I apologize for hitting the back button when I should be going forward. Here we go. All right, so our next subject is going to be talking about illicit firearms. And we've been working real hard to try to reduce the number of illicit firearms possession we have throughout the city. We suspect there may be some linkage between this and our aggravated assault numbers. And this is one of a number of things that we're trying to do to reduce dangerous assaults in the city of San Jose. And the way we approached this is we had our merge unit working a caseload of people who we thought might be in possession of firearms when they had downtime between training obligations or tactical operations. What we found is the initial protocol that we started wasn't as productive as we'd hoped, so we went in and tried a different process. And if you look at the section here on the left-hand side of your screen, what we were doing first is we were looking at the Armed and Prohibited Persons System, which is a system maintained by the California Department of Justice. And that lists persons who had lawfully acquired or purchased firearms in the past but have since become prohibited from possessing. And the DOJ creates that list so that agencies such as ourselves can go look at that and try to contact those people and ensure that they are no longer in charge of firearms, which would be unlawful for them to possess. We've spent, over the course of 5 months, the merge officers contacted, or did 25 follow-ups trying to do that. We didn't actually end up making any arrests or seizing any firearms. They found that in the majority of those cases, those firearms had been seized or surrendered prior to us ever making the check. And so it wasn't very focused on the front end. So they've changed over to what they're calling the Priority Gun Offender Program. And this is fairly new, but we're pretty excited about the outcome right now. What they're doing is they're choosing who to contact based on known firearms offenders in the county who are also currently wanted for offenses. And these are people who have multiple firearms offenses in their history and who we can arrest if we could find them. And so in cooperation with the district attorney's office, the officers from that unit are identifying these individuals who they think are most likely to be out on the streets and in possession of a firearm. Over the last 2 months, they picked 2 in particular to work, and both of them ended with an arrest, and both of them ended in recovery of a firearm. We took 2 handguns and 1 rifle off the street. We also, in just those 2 incidents, we ended up making arrests for other things such as gang enhancements, possession of narcotics for sale, and some human trafficking arrest that all came out of that. So we think this is a more productive way for us to approach reduction of illicit firearms possession, and we're going to move forward and see if this, as we move forward and do this more often, if we continue to have better results. We're going to have better results in the first program since we didn't get any firearms out of the first one. So that is our firearms possession program. And then let's talk a little bit about future reporting to the committee. I know you folks received a very in-depth report just about a week and a half ago on the 12th. None of the data has changed. It's available to us since then, so I'm not going to dive into the data on that. But going forward, we will bring data to the committee, and we will bring data that talks about sexual assault statistics year to date, and we will talk about all the strategy items that we are working on. We will give you, every bi-monthly, we'll give you an update on where we are on those. And if we have made any progress during that 2-month period with the countywide work group, we'll come back and we'll explain what that progress is as well. So that's kind of our moving forward intention. Which brings me to your turn.
Thank you very much. And apologize, I didn't mention earlier, if anybody has any comments, public speaker cards. I don't see any public speaker cards, actually. Are there none? No, I meant like for them to fill out. They are up at the top. Okay, thank you. So public speaker cards are up at the top. If you'd like to fill one out, you can bring it down here. That way you can speak on any of our items for today. So now I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Any comments or questions? Councilmember Arenas?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank you for your update overall and for making those additions to the sexual assault statistics, the work item updates, and the countywide work updates as well. We just had a joint meeting last night, and I think we have some momentum in making sure that our systems, both on the county and on the city side, are on the same page, right? And making some progress there in improving our own internal systems. And so I want to thank you for the work that you've done so far, and I look forward to the upcoming reports. I also want to thank our city manager's staff, beginning with Lee and Peter. I know that you've been very involved, and so thank you so much. I know that it takes a lot of behind-the-scenes work to get this all going, and so I really appreciate that. And of course, Jennifer, who's not here today, but knows that I'm just really grateful. I'm going to go to, I have a question about on page 4, on the aggravated assaults. I saw that there was an increase, of course, from 2018 to 2019, a 14% increase. And I wanted to ask a question about whether the increase of those aggravated assaults have anything to do with the vehicle thefts, because as in my district, I know that there's been an increase of aggravated assaults in connection with vehicle thefts because you actually need the fob key piece to get cars started, and so now
Yes.
you have to assault the person versus just, hot wiring a vehicle. So I wonder if there is a connection citywide on
No,
that.
so for UCR reporting, when we talk about vehicle theft, that's strictly in the property crime sense, so that doesn't involve an assault on a person. So when a assailant attacks a person or threatens a person in order to get their key fob and/or their car, that actually gets classified as a robbery.
Oh, I see.
Because that's a person crime. So when you look up at the robberies, where we're actually seeing a decline, we
Got
did have a big spike in juvenile-related and carjacking robberies a number of years ago that we're not seeing as much today.
Yeah, I think we're still seeing some of that trend happen at Eastridge, and I believe there was an increase in patrolling at Eastridge Mall. And I wonder if you would be able to share any updates on that or ask whether that is continuing to happen.
So I don't have that data in front of me, and these are obviously citywide crime stats.
Sure.
So I wasn't
think
familiar with that particular item.
Sure, no,
and I'm not
it's
prepared.
pretty specific. I just expect that with the holidays coming up, that this is going to start, increasing. And, I have a public safety series happening in my district to make sure that we're as safe as we can be and doing our part in keeping safe, right? To, bringing out those keys or the fob or whatever as soon as you step out of, or even before you step out of the store. But I'm just wondering if we're going to have any measures ahead of time, some proactive steps in augmenting some police presence at our malls across the city, not just in my district.
So it is very typical to see an increase in robberies and thefts at the stores during the holiday season. That's just something that's been happening as long as I've been involved in police work, and the old timers told me about it as if it was a known truism. So, that is going to continue to happen, and we know that's going to happen.
Right.
We often in years past have added foot patrols at the malls. I don't know what our specific plans are for this year, but I will relay your concerns back to the division captains.
Thank you. And so now I'm going to move on to slide 9. And thank you so much for bringing back this information. I believe I had also asked Angeli to help us break down whether some of the perpetrators for sexual assault with children under the age of 14, if they were living at the same residence as their victims. And so hopefully we'll see that in a future report. But for now, I wanted just to point out that under the arrest demographics on page 9 for race and role, I see that there's African American, and although there's only 3 for adults and 3 for juveniles, on the following page, there was no juvenile suspects, although there were 3 juvenile arrests. So that concerns me, and I don't know how you would explain that.
So the way we determine what age and race a suspect is before we, when we're first taking the report, is that we ask the survivor, can you please describe the person who did this to us? And so if they tell us it looks like an 18-year-old, we write down adult. If they tell us it looks like a 15-year-old, we write down juvenile. And in the end, when we end up actually making an arrest, sometimes we find out that the actual age may have been several years in one direction or the other. So there's not always going to be a straight correlation between those.
So if I understand this correctly, your suspect demographics are as a victim reports them, not as they are found later.
So that's exactly what we mean when we say suspect. That's the description of the person given to us by the victim.
By the victim.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
so-
then the arrestee is what the person turns out to be if we actually meet them and arrest them.
Got it. So that way, that's why there would be a discrepancy there.
Yeah, there's always going to be some variance.
I see. And can you explain why there, and this might fall under the same explanation, but under the juvenile suspect, under Latino, there's 8, but then under arrests, there are none. Is that because they
Tell me
missed?
which 2 pages. I'm not sure if we're talking about 261.
It's 9 and 10. I'm flipping
9
through
and
9
10,
and
okay, very
10,
good, thank
the
you.
ones that you have for arrest and race. And so I'm wondering if maybe this is the same thing happening where a victim identifies a Hispanic, Latino, Mexican perpetrator as a suspect and then ends up being an adult.
That would be my supposition from looking at it.
So from what I remember the numbers to be, as a snapshot, the highest number of suspect or highest number of incidents for sexual assaults were Latino, Caucasian, and Asian as being the top 3. But here in arrests, the top 3 are Latino, Caucasian, and African American. Although here there's only one suspect of demographics, and I don't know how that is broken up, whether it's Vietnamese and Japanese. And we have only like 5, I think, a total of 5. But from the data that we saw last week in the special hearing, there's some, and maybe it's because of the time period, it's between January through September of this year. But I think in the trends, we saw that Asian are the 3rd largest number of victims. So I guess for this year, you focus on the current cases as they are, and don't have the ability to maybe go back into former years to really accurately arrest the top 3 perpetrator.
So may I?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, so when we choose who to arrest, we choose that based on, the facts known to us in the case and where the investigative leads in that case take us. And we don't start that arrest process by contemplating the how is this going to affect racial breakouts when we assess
Sure.
it in after fact. Right? So every one of these cases is a function of what were the investigators able to determine and were they able to prove probable cause for an arrest. And when you start looking at, again, when you look at the number of suspects, the numbers are higher because we're going to have a suspect with every incident report that we take. And then you look at the number of arrests, and that number gets smaller because we don't make arrests for every investigation that we do. And when you consider that we're only looking at year to date, it becomes an even smaller number. We're only looking at 3/4 of
Very
the year.
minute.
And then
Yeah.
that's when we start running into problems where we start trying to make suppositions about trends based on these very small sample sizes. I know that the council wanted us to bring this back, and we're happy to do that, but it's dangerous to make suppositions about such small sample sizes.
Yeah, and I don't, because we were talking about a 12-year historical data presentation, I thought this was also, and I didn't catch that it was only this year. So sometimes I think we need to also compare apples to apples. So if we ask for this data based on the original data that you presented, which was from 2012, then I would imagine that you would bring back information based on 2012 to current date. Otherwise, the follow-up is inaccurate. My request was to have this data based on what you originally presented. Now you gave me a slice of the pie, which throws everything off. But my concern, if we just go beyond these numbers, is to make sure that we are not arresting juveniles or any one particular group more than another, would be my concern. And so that was what the data had kind of pointed out last week. obviously, this is just a piece of the pie here, and so I think that's why it doesn't make sense to me. And that's why I wanted to have this additional information, but this additional information to me isn't accurate, because now we're comparing this year with the 12-year trend that you presented to us, or the trend that you presented to us with data starting with 2012. So hopefully we can, and I don't know how we can do this from here on, Chair, that when we take a look at some of this data, there's times, and this happened at the special hearing, I think it's just sometimes, you know, an analyst decides it's probably easiest because there's resource constraints, and I totally understand that. But that we are presented with information based on last information, and sometimes we segment that data differently at each meeting. Sometimes it's the last 2 years, sometimes it's the last 3. Today's just this current year. I don't know what the best standard is, but I think if we're going to take a look at trends, that it is a longer period of time. Like you said, it's very dangerous to just take a look at a slice of the pie. We can say what's happening this year, right, in terms of our best guess. But I think my purpose was to really take a look at this more comprehensively. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think we should standardize our data as it's presented to us, and we can decide, you know, these reviews, let's stick to the original data that you presented. So if you came to us originally in our special hearing with data from 2012, that we would stick to that data until we are finished with that work item. Because otherwise I can see this going, it'll be confusing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that we actually have now the addition of the bi-monthly sexual assault reporting, and in here, Lieutenant Cook, you denoted on the slide that sexual assault statistics year to date. So I guess in regards to what Councilmember Dennis was talking about, do you believe you can sort of have a standard approach on those bi-monthly reports, and maybe even, I don't know if it doesn't sound like you want to incorporate a motion that clarifies that, Councilmember Dennis, so I'm comfortable if you wanted to talk offline and then kind of determine, you know, what that standard set might be, and then give you a chance, Lieutenant Cook, to answer now and just see what the intent might be for these now ongoing bi-monthly reports.
And Chair, could I add that maybe we look at the work items that are going to be reported, and that would tell us what data set to request based on the original data, so that we would just follow that. But we can take this offline and figure that piece out. But there's items on that work plan that are very specific to trends versus just year to date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in this one we don't necessarily have yet, so this is a brand new addition. So
right, but the third thing that they're going to come back with is the second thing is sexual assault strategy work item updates.
mm-hmm.
Right, so that means updates on work that we requested through the special hearings or the special meetings, and then county work group item updates as well. And I also brought this issue up at the county because it's not exclusive to us. It's, you know, it's different agencies coming in with different their own slice of data, and I think it's important just to standardize, to figure out what time frame are we going to ask for. I think for the work items that we stick to what we originally asked for, and then obviously the sexual assault statistics year to date speak for themselves. They're year to date, and we can say that we only want them from that calendar year or from a fiscal year, and that I think that's up to the group to decide, or you as a chair to decide what year we refer to.
I guess I was leaving it up to the police department. So if you have something more specific than that, I think you'd have to make that recommendation. So I'm comfortable if that's what I was saying. If you wanted to have a conversation with them, if there's something more specific, right, then I'm fine with that as well. So
We're really happy to do that. I mean, our goal here is to bring you the information that you want from us, and the way you see these slides structured in front of you, quite honestly, was what I thought you had specifically asked me for. My goal is to bring you what you want. So, you know, and standardization makes us really happy, because it's easier for us to prepare for the meetings. We're preparing for the same thing, you know, bi-monthly after bi-monthly, and it's really more telling, isn't it, when we can have the same data, you know, time after time. So we've been together talking about this for the last 7 months or so since I started this job, and it seems like we're talking about different data points every time, because we've been asked for something different every time. So we would be really enthusiastic about standardizing what you want. If you don't want year-to-date, tell us what you want, and we'll figure it out and we'll get it rolling.
Okay, yeah, I'm comfortable with that, and I will allow you to check in with Councilmember Arenas and anybody else that's interested, sort of to determine that. And if we don't get a good determination before the next meeting, then what we will do is we will actually discuss that and make a decision up here as a body. So, okay,
Thank you very much.
Questions or comments? I just have one then. In regards to the illicit firearm possession, in regards to the priority gun offenders, so I know you were saying you were using the armed prohibited persons list. So in regards to now the list, you're just using for wanted individuals with warrants, but yet also with gun priors.
Yes, sir.
Anything more specific than that as far as where you know, individuals you're targeting, or?
Well, it's kind of evolving, sir. The objective is not just to go after somebody who's no longer allowed to own a firearm, but somebody who has a history of illicitly committing crimes with firearms, and somebody who, if we were to take them into custody, we would also be solving a series of other problems. And so we've decided to try and focus on those individuals, because they are more likely to be armed than if we just randomly pick from the APS list of people who've been arrested and may or may not have surrendered their firearms. So we find that, you know, focusing on somebody who's got an open criminal matter and a history of firearms is actually getting more firearms off the streets than merely just kind of working the list from Department of Justice.
Yeah, I asked because if we're having the merge unit focus on this, obviously that's a highly trained unit, and so it sounded like, and I'm glad you were willing to publicize sort of what was a lesson learned in regards to, you know, not so successful approach. Sounds like, you know, I don't know if these were individuals that were abiding by the law once they were told they couldn't own a gun, and then they sort of, you know, that's what was happening. But the shift now, and this is what I am, you know, sort of happy about, is it sounds like the individuals you got arrested and the guns out of their hands, when you mentioned the other charges, right? This wasn't just an individual with a gun charge, and these were individuals that were probably involved in a number of other illegal activities. And so that certainly just in those 2 months, right, sounds like a much better use of time for our merge unit. So I hope that kind of continue. I know you didn't really specify again, though. I'm hoping that the focus is on individuals, right, that are going to pose a real danger and threat. It sounds like that's what these 2 arrests were. Just hope that you know, that trend will continue.
You're right on the mark, sir. Our goal is to make the community safer as a whole, and this is just one venue for us to get there. We do believe there's a place to be doing APPS work with the automated prohibited persons system. I'm sorry, the armed prohibited persons system. We just don't think we should be using our tactical team for that. So there's still some administrative work that can be done to make sure that people who no longer should possess weapons in our community are in some manner contacted to confirm that they've turned those firearms in. But we're going to focus our tactical team towards more robust offenders.
Agreed. Okay. Thank you. And if we can get a motion to accept the report? Yes, Councilmember Dennis.
Thank you. I just listening to the conversation, I'm thinking about what we're going to talk about next, or it's on the agenda, and that's domestic violence. And I wonder if we are making any focus on some of the folks who own firearms, who have had domestic violence charges, pending. As you know, that ultimately our survivors, or the ones who survive, are always in danger. Their lives are always in danger.
You know, I'm not aware of any specific program to that effect, but honestly, I'm not in command of the domestic violence or family violence unit. That gentleman's going to be up here any moment now, and you may want to
I
see
mean,
what he has
in
to say.
terms of a cross-reference for the illicit firearms possession, I know that you have certain, a list or certain factors or certain charges that bring some folks up to make them a target in order to follow up. I just wonder if domestic violence is one of those charges.
I do not know.
Thank you.
Okay. If we can get a motion to accept the report. A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Thank you, Lieutenant Cook.
Thank you.
And we will now move on to item D2, which is our Domestic Violence Prevention and Awareness Annual Report. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Lang. I'm a lieutenant with the San Jose Police Department with our Family Violence Unit.
Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Mansfield. I'm the Associate Director of Support Services at YWCA.
Okay, today what we'd like to speak with you about is the Domestic Violence Prevention and Awareness Annual Report. What slide number 1 here shows is just a summary of what our Family Violence Unit is and how we're made up. Our goal remains the same as it was last year, and that's to utilize a multidisciplinary approach that integrates effective investigation and support services to survivors of family violence in a safe and friendly environment. What we have in the Family Violence Center is my Family Violence Unit from the Police Department as well as some other things. The first portion here talks about the San Jose Police Department, about our sworn staffing. In my unit, I have 3 teams. I have my domestic violence detail, which we also know as intimate partner violence, or IPV today. We have the threat management detail, which deals with things like domestic violence restraining orders, stalking, threats, workplace violence, that type of crime. And lastly, we have our team that does the child abuse, elder abuse, and dependent adult abuse. Those are the 3 teams that are the sworn staff there. In addition, we're very fortunate in our Family Violence Center to have our outside partners there. We have Santa Clara County Department of Family and Child Services, which nowadays we call DFCS. Back in the day, we called them CPS, for those of us that have been around a while. Of course, next to me here, we have our victim advocate from YWCA of Silicon Valley. Lindsay isn't in our office full-time, but she supervises the person that works in our office for us. And we also have a part-time district attorney from the Santa Clara DA's office. The next slide shows what our data is for the fiscal year of 2018-2019. So it has the 4 basic crimes that are categorized as domestic violence, and it has those broken down, and it has it broken down by month as well. If you look on the bottom right, it's 4,009 is the number of domestic violence related events that came to our unit this past fiscal year. In relation to the prior fiscal year, that number is down by 90. It was 4099. Now we have, 4099. Now it's 4009. So a reduction of 90 of those types of cases coming into our unit this past fiscal year. One of the things that we're always looking to do is improve our services to our IPV victims or survivors. And since 2016, we've been partners contractually with our YWCA advocates, and we have a great working relationship. As I mentioned, we have an advocate in our office. She's bilingual, and she is able to be that full-time advocate in our office. She does counseling, lethality and risk assessment, safety planning, restraining order assistance. She aids in accessing services, referrals, et cetera. In this past fiscal year, she was able to do 1,614 follow-ups. That's up 100 from the previous year of 1514. So she was able to do 100 additional follow-ups this fiscal year versus the prior year. The next line shows the services and referrals provided to those. It was 306 survivors this year. That was up from the prior year from 201. So a dramatic increase there. We're quite proud of the work that she's doing there. She's doing a great job. And in addition, of course, we have our 24-hour hotline that is always available to survivors related to this type of thing. The next slide discusses our domestic violence high-risk response team. I was last here a few months ago, and we discussed the plans to implement the program. So today we get to discuss what we've done thus far and hopefully where we get to go from here. The goal of this program is to reduce lethality and improve service delivery to our IPV survivors by having the YWCA advocate who's available for an in-person response after hours. A lot of times these types of calls, especially the high lethality cases, they will occur after hours. So by having this advocate available and able to respond out there, meet with our survivor out there in the field at that really rough time in their life, and to establish that rapport and start working with them immediately, it's been a really good program for us. We copied this or modeled it after other programs nationwide, and that's where the high-risk response team name comes from. So our program officially launched on June 1st of this year. To date, we've had 5 after-hour deployments where the advocate's gone out and met with the survivors in the field. The program is continuing to grow as we move. The monies were initially set aside, and it takes time to hire these. You have to have the right advocates for this position, and it takes time to hire them. It takes time to train them and get them in position. So our ultimate goal is ideally to have 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., those hours every weekday covered, as well as all weekend. So we're doing a decent job of that with the staffing available, but that's our goal, and that's what we're still driving towards as people are continued to be trained and hired. And of course, if there is a situation where the advocate's already on a different call, or if the advocate isn't available, then we still have the 24-hour hotline to fall back on. So we still have a great resource for our survivor. The domestic violence high-risk response team nationwide model has 4 separate strategies. So I'm going to briefly discuss those. Many of those were already in place before we implemented this program. The first main strategy is early identification of high-risk cases. Since 2015, San Jose police officers have conducted a lethality assessment in every IPV call that they go to. So they're asking these questions and determining the risk to that survivor. They do this questionnaire helps us determine the lethality, but it also makes sure that they're asking the right questions to have a thorough investigation completed into that incident. And now that we have the HRT, what we do is we use that lethality assessment to determine if the response by the advocate is appropriate, if it is an after-hours situation. The next of the 4 main strategies is engagement of multidisciplinary team. The YWCA didn't respond to the field before we had them available through the 24-hour hotline, but now they're responding. So that's where we're starting with our multidisciplinary response. So we're able to get them some of the services that they may need then and there. And I mentioned some of the great things that our YWCA partners do already. Going on to the third of the 4 strategies, that's ongoing monitoring and containment of offenders. Our department, as well as the other agencies in our county, we have a pro-arrest policy. So if a IPV incident occurs and there's probable cause to make an arrest, our department shall make an arrest, and we will book that person into jail. So that's where it starts. So our job is to, if that person needs to go to jail, our job is to get them into jail. And then we work with our partners at the district attorney's office. We follow their status through the jail situation. We have probation and parole partners that we're working with, and members of my unit, they monitor these high-risk offenders or repeat offenders to know what their status is, to check in with the survivors, and to see if it's appropriate to lock them up again. If that's what we need to do, then that's what we're trying to do to try to keep those people as safe as possible, our survivors. The fourth of the four main strategies is the victim services. As I mentioned before, YWCA is our contract partner. They do a phenomenal job, but they also work with all of the other agencies because there's wonderful agencies throughout our area that the Y works with. So we have a lot of services through the non-government agencies as well as through the victim services of the district attorney's office. There's a lot out there, and we want to make sure that we do whatever we can to try to help our survivors out. On slide 8, what we're looking at is the alignment of city resources to maximize our domestic violence services. I'm very proud to report that our unit has grown this last year, and so a year ago, my predecessor, Lieutenant Derek Chin, was here, and he was here to tell you that he had 12 sworn personnel in his unit, and his authorized staffing was 14, so he was nearly maxed out. Today, I have 14 personnel sworn in my unit, and the chief's office has raised our maximum or our authorized staffing to 20. So they've obviously shown that this is important to them, and we're now going to eventually be able to grow this unit as staffing becomes available up to 20. So we're doing better than we were a year ago, and we have a road plan to move forward on that, which is wonderful. In addition, our crime prevention unit does a lot of really good work. They go out, they're working with different schools, junior high possibly, a lot of the high schools. They're doing teen dating, violence awareness. They talk about healthy relationships and getting that seed planted early, what a healthy relationship is and what an unhealthy relationship is. They talk about personal safety, cyberbullying, and a whole bunch of other things. But one of the big things that they've done lately is the healthy relationship stuff. So we're very happy about that. At this point, that's what I had for the main portion of the presentation. I imagine there are some questions that you may have for myself and or Lindsay.
Thank you very much. Question, and I'll invite my colleagues in the back to join us back in the front. Any questions, Councilmember Arenas?
Yes, Chair.
Turn it over to you first.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I'm absolutely impressed with your strategies and also your approach and the service that you're rendering. I love this multidisciplinary approach that you've had. You've really weaved in the right players, TFCS, APS, TA's office. And I know that we've been talking a lot about intersectionality, and I know that you're very aware of this. You're cognizant in your approach to our survivors. What is the plan to have our sexual assault unit and our family violence unit connect? Because I'm sure that we know the data, the research always tells us one is sometimes the other, right? So there is a lot of sexual assault happening among intimate partners. How are you coordinating with our sexual assault unit?
Good question. So the way that these situations work is when the patrol officers go out there and they take the initial report, they're determining what crimes occurred or didn't occur, and then that report will get routed to whichever unit is most appropriate. If it's just a domestic violence call, that report will come to my office. If it's a sexual assault call, it will go to the sexual assault unit. But detectives in both units work very well together on a regular basis because, like you said, it does cross over, unfortunately.
How about if it's both? How about it's a domestic violence situation with sexual assault? Where does that go?
The sexual assault unit is considered a higher level of investigation, if you will, than the family violence unit. And I don't mean to disparage my own unit. What I mean by that is that If it's both, then the sexual assault, it automatically gets routed to the sexual assault unit, and they would investigate both portions of it. That's why the detectives would, if they had questions related specifically to the domestic violence portion, our detectives would assist in that investigation. But because the sexual assault is considered a more serious crime, that unit would get the case and investigate it as the primary investigators.
Sure, and how does that play out with our service provider? I mean, I know that you have your hands full, obviously, with all the visits and the touches that we're making, the contacts that we're having with these families. But I wonder, how are you coordinating that? If Lindsay, you could.
Yes, so just as though, and I'm sure Lindsay has something to add, I'll just add one thing real quick. Just as though I have multiple detectives and any one detective would handle a case for a survivor, but there's multiple, same thing, we have an advocate in our office and there's an advocate from the Y in the sexual assault unit as well. So there's already somebody in place, and whichever one, I'm sure they coordinate and work together as necessary to make sure that the survivors are getting what they need. And I'll turn it over to Lindsay. I'm sure she has a better answer.
Yeah, I think that has been something that we've heard a lot from survivors, is that they wish, there was one detective that kind of covered both, which the sexual assault unit does, but it's confusing for people. So a lot of the coordination happens behind the scenes with law enforcement and then with our advocates. We only recently got an advocate into the sexual assault investigative unit, so we're hopeful that now having embedded advocates in both units will ease that process.
Got it. I look forward to hopefully having more of a connection between both of those units, and I know that our chief is bringing forward this idea of a special victims unit, which I think would create and bridge that concern, and so hopefully we can make that happen for the future. In the meantime, I know that there's a lot of work to make those connections, and we don't have the resources, obviously, right? So sometimes some things get lost. So I think the Special Victims Unit can help with fixing that. The other thing I wanted to say was I just wanted to thank you for being out in our community and doing some of this prevention work. We got to benefit last week from our healthy relationships workshop, and we had, I think, half of the room, maybe most of the room were high school kids, and so we got them there, right? And I was really happy that they weren't just there to report back to their teachers that they were there, but they had questions. They took the topic seriously, and I know that it makes an impact in our community when we're talking about this more openly, and it's not a taboo. And so it's a difficult, it's a difficult topic to sometimes bring up, but I want to thank you for all of the prevention, and of course at the other end when we're already intervening in the lives of these folks. So thank you.
Councilmember Carrasco?
Thank you. I just wanted to echo, I wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing. And of course, this is an issue that we've been working hard on. Yesterday, we had a very difficult discussion at the county related to sexual abuse in the county. And this is, of course, closely related. And the numbers are alarming, as we see. And I don't understand why we keep seeing the trend go up when we think that we keep making strides and we think that we're doing preventative work as well as intervention and education. And I don't know if this is just going to be just a social issue that we're just going to have to keep chipping away constantly. I was working on this over 30 years ago, and I wish I remember the numbers back then. I don't remember the numbers back then. If you can dig them up, that'd be great. But I don't know if you have them archived anywhere. But if you, I'm looking through my notes here, and give me just a second to just gather myself, because I was trying to. So the numbers overall are pretty astounding, but of all those cases, am I reading this correctly? Only 5 of those were assisted through our partnership with the YWCA? What am I reading when I see that number?
The 5 number on that slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's 5 after-hours responses by the YWCA advocate in person on a high lethality intimate partner violence incident.
So that just means the after hours?
Correct.
Okay, not overall?
Correct.
Okay. So I was not reading it correctly. Okay. I just wanted to be clear on that. Would you just give me a more, let's put the numbers aside and let's put the data and the graphs aside. And if you could just give me a more personal, account, either one of you or maybe both of you, if you could just give me an understanding of how this blending of work is taking place, how that's figuring in terms of how we're dealing with, especially with the survivors of a very difficult situation.
I can definitely speak to that. Although in my position, people may not expect it, I actually have been participating in going out on these calls and kind of the lead on them. So if you'd like, I can relay kind of.
I'd appreciate that, yeah.
So de-identifying, of course, but one response that we went out on involved law enforcement, so an officer from San Jose PD, as well as medical providers, because we were in the ER of Valley Medical Center, and then myself and a new advocate that was being trained. When you're going out to the ER, obviously there's been physical assault, so you're seeing individuals that are very distraught, potentially going through x-rays, CTs, these kinds of things. And what really stood out to me is how much the officer cared, because in the past, I can say that we haven't always had the same experience or the same relationships. And so I think the fact that we do have an embedded advocate, that we're going out and doing presentations together, and that we understand each other's roles and responsibilities, has an impact on the survivor. Because when I showed up to the hospital, the officer was also advocating on the survivor's behalf. And that makes a really big difference, because law enforcement has authority, right, that an advocate doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so between us as partners and then Valley Medical Center saying, I'm so glad that this program is in place, I feel like the survivors in these situations can see that it's not just one entity or one person that cares about the issue, but it's actually partners coming together from different sides of the issue and providing that support. And the outcome is that they can then maybe feel more engaged, and the hope is that they'll stay with the process and get the support they need from each of us.
That's great. Thank you so much. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I'm not sure I can add much to it. She was there and saw it. I know that when this program came online, my responsibility was to make sure that our patrol staff was aware of it. So I went to all of our briefings, and I made sure that they understood that this was not just some new program. It was a program that we needed to care about and that we needed to really be invested in, and that we needed to take seriously, and not just another thing for them to have to worry about, but really put themselves in the shoes of that survivor or whatever. And I wanted our patrol personnel to understand what a important thing this was to me, to my crew over there, of course, but to Chief Garcia and to everybody, all of our partners, the council, everybody. is very, very concerned about this. So I did what I could to impress upon them how important this is. And I know most people get it, but it was a good reminder, I believe. And I think that our department, we have a lot of very young patrol officers right now, and I think it was good for them to hear it from somebody that's been around a while, how important this is, and to take the right approach towards this program.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because I think that as we're moving forward and we're really delving a lot deeper into whether it's domestic violence or sexual assault, we're really looking at what are the best practices, whether it's around the country or maybe right here in our own backyard. I would like to really be seen as the county and the city that's seen as the model for others to look at. And I think that this is a great model to look at if it works, if we can have the agencies that are coming together. Of course, our law enforcement officers are going out there and they're doing, we know it's a clear-cut role, what they're supposed to do. They're enforcing the law and they're taking care of the responsibilities. But when we partner them with an advocate for the survivor, I was wondering if they felt like it was an imposition or how they would feel it coming into their purview of responsibilities, and to have them carry out the responsibilities with added. I think that they're compassionate because they take on this responsibility, but to have yet still another lens of compassion, I think does provide for best practices. So thank you so much for that. And then, of course, as we are rounding the year and we'll be coming up again with our next budget priorities, it's just good to know whether or not this is having the kind of results that we would hope. There's more to come, we'll see. But thank you so much for that. I think at the end of the day, what we want to see is whether this makes a difference for the survivors and how they one is that they survive the incident, but then how do they survive? How do they come out of it? What's their perception of the experience? And how the rest of the community wraps themselves around it? And what do we do to provide those services, starting with our law enforcement officers? And like you said, they carry so much authority. That uniform speaks volumes even when they're not speaking. So when they go out and they advocate themselves for the victim, I think it reinforces everything that we've been trying to do as well for our victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, and appreciate the report. I wanted to see in regards to the staffing. First off, I appreciate that the number of authorized has been increased up to 20. I want to see what you mentioned about a pathway to kind of get fully staffed up. What does that look like going forward? How soon do we think we will actually be fully staffed up? And considering the caseload and the increase, the trend that we've seen of increasing caseload, we know that if we can decrease that, we can certainly get much more production out of our investigators. And so just kind of curious if you can paint a picture on that.
Yes, we don't have a set timeline, unfortunately. As you will know, we have 3 academy classes per year. As each academy class graduates, those new recruits go out to the field training officer program. So when they get released from the FTO program, I think that's when the chief and his staff, when they have the most flexibility to try to backfill units. I know for a fact that they've made the family violence unit a priority, but unfortunately there are a lot of other competing priorities within the department, and the chiefs are doing what they can with the available officers that they do have. Our current FTO program has 36 recruits in it. If they all complete the program successfully and become solo beat officers, that would be near the end of January, beginning of February, sometime in that time frame. So my fingers are crossed that, at that time frame, we may be able to get another officer or two into my unit. But again, I'm competing with every other unit on our department for those available bodies. But I know that it has, our unit as well as many others have definitely been a priority lately, which is shown because we have 2 more than we did a year ago. And I've been in my position 10 months now, and I've already received, two additional bodies during that time. And I'm hoping that trend continues, and I believe it will.
And I understand you may not be able to answer the question, but I see Deputy Chief Mata, I think he's still up there. Chief, I'm going to call you down. You might be able to help answer it. So, as you just pointed out, Lieutenant Lang, we have 3 academies a year now, so we have these opportunities 3 times a year as well to be able to allocate potentially, officers into some of these voids. I imagine there's probably ongoing regular discussion. Thank you for coming down, Chief. There's probably regular discussion, right, with the chief, with yourself, right, the other deputy chiefs, and then because you're hearing word from, your lieutenants and the captains and stuff to say, hey, this is where we think we really have a need, and similar to how we're chiming in, all right. So, when will we have a better idea on the allocation of some of these spots to get a better, just a projection on when they would be filled?
Sure, Councilmember. Again, good afternoon. Deputy Chief Motto with the Chief's office here. Yeah, each bureau and each unit has submitted a staffing plan, right, as we grow. So as we get bodies, they would be allocated to that staffing plan. The department has a priority, right? Our priority right now is patrol. As patrol grows, we have, and as those positions get filled, then any of those go to other units, whether it be BOI, BOA in our training academy, or BTS, wherever they're needed. So we have a priority, like you mentioned. Just recently, we received requests to increase our traffic enforcement unit. Well, okay, we need people in sexual assaults unit, we need people in family violence units. So again, based on that staffing plan that we have, if there are bodies that we can release out of patrol, they will go into the priority that we have for each bureau. So as Lieutenant Lang mentioned, one at a time, each body that we have will be allocated to different units. I know there's a request for, we mentioned the Special Victims Unit, right? There's 5 officers slated to go there, and 1 sergeant. Again, that's based on the budget. So we already have our authorized limits for each one of these bureaus and units. So hopefully with the budget coming up here, we're allocated more positions. So as we get bodies, then we can allocate bodies to the different units.
And since you mentioned, I know it was part of the last discussion, but the Special Victims Unit, can you expand a little bit on, we talked about today sort of the hierarchy of if a case comes in that involves both domestic violence and sexual assault unit will take it. What is Special Victims Unit now gonna be overseeing, and where will they be in that hierarchy?
So the Special Victims Unit is going to be part of the Sexual Assaults Unit. So what we're planning to do is separate it, because the span of control is large, because the Sexual Assault Unit not only has Sexual Assault Unit, the bullpen, which are fresh cases coming in, but human trafficking, 290 registration, juvenile assault, juvenile crimes, or the juvenile unit, and missing persons. So what we're going to do is bifurcate sexual assaults, just as that, sexual assaults with the bullpen, and then the Special Victims Unit will have the 290 human trafficking and juvenile
ICAC
units. And I'm sorry, and ICAC as well. So that will require a lieutenant to oversee that, while we have the current lieutenant overseeing sexual assault. So our goal is to increase sexual assaults with the 5 officers and the sergeant, and 1 lieutenant to oversee those other units, ICAC, human trafficking, and 290, and juvenile unit as well. And because those units already have sergeants and officers and detectives, so we just need someone to oversee that and expand that. So that's our plan for Special Victims Unit, if the budget allows to add those additional positions.
Okay, thank you for that. And I do appreciate the increase in personnel. This one, I think I'm good.
Okay.
Chief, thank you.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Lang, do you think 20 is that sufficient for the caseloads that we have now? If we, now that's our goal, that's the allocated number, if we get to 20, or do you think that it's, is the number, should it even be higher?
That's a very good question. I don't have a specific, I don't have a perfect answer for you. I think that I know that we're doing a good job with 14, and I know we would do better with 15, and that's going to get better with 16. And when we get to 20, or even as we approach that number, and then I'll have some discussions with my chain of command up there, and I'll let them know. I can't really know. I've only been in my position 10 months, so I don't really know what we would look like with 16 or 17, but I know everybody I get right now is a dramatic improvement. I like to think that 20 would be good enough, but only time would tell, to be honest with you.
Okay, thank you. And then Lindsay, right, Lindsay? Thank you for the feedback in regards to just how you saw our officers conducting themselves. We appreciate that. It's definitely helpful to have that, and to have advocates, right, to be there to assist. Officers have one role to play, but to have an advocate there, I think, to your point, what these survivors are seeing, right, is that they are cared about, right, that it has a full, community, that we want to provide the resources for them, and not just an officer to kind of, come in and do a report.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you. Sure, Chief.
I'm sorry, Councilman, Committee, wanted to add one more thing that Councilman Arenas mentioned. The Family Violence Unit does have grants that they have put together officers to go out for these high lethality cases, and they do look for those suspects that have firearms as well. So they go out there, on an overtime basis, and try to make contact with these individuals who are at high risk and also involve firearms. That's answers the question that you had earlier.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that back up. Okay. No other questions? Go. Yep, Councilman Arenas.
Just one more question about data. And I'm going to assume that because you're not at the 20, you're at 14 sworn personnel, that this might be the reason why the case assignment rate is lowered. So in 2017 to 2018, it was 99%, and in 2018 to 2019, it was 89%. And so I'm wondering if you would care to share about why that is.
Yes, and I'm sorry, were you, the numbers you were looking at, were they in the report?
It's on page 4
Okay.
of the report.
Yes, that's a good question. So when we're looking at those numbers, the top number there, 10,210 cases, those are the entire caseload that comes into the Family Violence Unit, all told. So that includes child elder abuse, and it also includes our threats cases. The 89% that are cases assigned is the cases that the sergeants review and determine are in need of being sent to a detective to actually investigate. Some of those other cases that are not captured here, they were not part of the domestic violence calls, because those may be cross reports that we received from DFCS, and that might have been something of maybe a general neglect or something that wasn't criminal in nature. So that may be something that's being reported to us that has increased that number to 10,210, but not necessarily a case that needed to be looked at by a detective. Because once the sergeant scanned the case, when it comes in, reads it, reviews it, and determines that it was simply a cross report to make sure that DFCS was complying with cross reporting everything, but looking at it, there was no need for an investigation because nothing criminal had occurred.
And maybe this is something that we can add to, just to augment, to tell us the whole picture of this. Otherwise, it looks like we're having a lower case assignment right? It would be great to just have some of that data in there, just to fill out the whole picture of that, and possibly tell us where else to look, right? So if there's always system improvements that we can take a look at, and if it's a lack of information, or it really isn't a criminal act and it's referred to another system, and what are those systems that we're referring these cases back to, just to make sure that, you know, the loop has been closed.
Okay.
So it would be great to have this in your next annual report.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if we can get a motion. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to item D3, which is our comprehensive annual fiscal report for fiscal year 2019. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Julia Cooper, Director of Finance. I have with me Lisa Titano, Assistant Director of Finance, Annie Toe, our Deputy Director of Finance for Accounting, and David Bullock, who's the Managing Partner at MGO. So wanted to, this is a pretty big effort for us to be here before the committee. It's been 6 years since we've actually presented the comprehensive annual financial report to the committee. Because of timing, we've gone directly to council. So I want to commend the staffing in both the accounting division, across the finance department, and MGO for working really hard to get this report here today, because timeliness of financial reporting is a big issue for the regulators, especially the SEC right now. So for us to kind of move this ahead and get this done as quickly as possible is important for our perception in the municipal bond market. And I also just want to note that this is a draft report. It just gave us an opportunity to get it to you. We did some final number checking. The report has been finalized, and we're in the printing stage. So next week, you, along with the rest of the council members, will receive a printed version of the report for your information, and then it'll be presented in full to the city council later in December. So as we move to the next slide, it isn't just the comprehensive annual financial report that's presented to you, but there are 20 other reports that go into reviewing the city's financial position over the course of the previous fiscal year. And here's a list of them there. They go from the various bond audits to the airport to the Clean Water Financing Authority, a lot of federal grant reporting. So that's just a comprehensive list up there for you to see. All of those reports, once they are completed, are posted on the city auditor's website under external audits. The city auditor is responsible for overseeing and contracting with MGO for the completion of all these audits during the course of the fiscal year. So the report, if you printed it out, it's nearly 300 pages. Most of you probably just looking at it on your iPad. But in terms of the table of contents, it includes the transmittal letter, which gives a high level of overview of what happened during the year. There's independent auditor's opinion is presented, as well as a management discussion analysis of the findings. Then the basic financial statements, which present both government-wide, enterprise, and fiduciary funds. And then notes to the basic financial statements, and those are very, very comprehensive and have expanded over the course of multiple years by the Government Accounting Standards Board, which makes pronouncements about how local government agencies should present their financial statements. And Annie will talk about some of the GASBs that we implemented this year and to come up into the future. And then it includes supplementary information, and then also a statistical section, which has a lot of good information. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Good afternoon. What I was going to walk through is the independent auditor's report. It's the first page of the financial section, and that really highlights the responsibilities and includes the opinion that we express on the financial statement. So just to highlight a few things, we want to make sure that you understand management's responsibilities, and by that we mean that the financial statements have been fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and that management employs good internal controls. The auditor's responsibility is to express an opinion on those financial statements, and we use audit procedures to verify information, corroborate information, and we use that to ensure that the financial statements are presented fairly, and that's what our opinion is based upon. I'm happy to report that we issued an unmodified opinion. It's the highest level of assurance that we can provide as your auditors, and basically we were saying that we agree with how management has presented the financial statements. The fourth bullet, other matters, just lets you know the level of responsibility within the report. You know, as Julia mentioned, there's over 300 pages in this report, so there's a lot of information in there. Not all of it has been audited. So we audited the basic financial statements and the footnotes, but we provide limited assurance on what we call required supplementary information, so things like management's discussion and analysis, where there's a lot of subjective information that describes what happened during the year. That's limited to inquiries and comparing to our financial statements, but we don't audit that to the same level. And then all of the supplementary schedules after the footnote disclosures that give a lot of detail on specific funds, that's audited in relation to the basic financial statements, but we don't provide any assurance on the introductory section, which includes the transmittal letter, or the statistical section, which is it's a good source of information, and we compare it to the financial statements, but it gives you 10-year trend information. And so we don't express an opinion on that. On the next slide, we just wanted to highlight, anytime there's been significant changes, we want to make sure that you're aware of them. And one of those changes was GASB statement number 88, which changed how this debt is disclosed in the financial statement. So there were some significant additions to the disclosure as it relates to your long-term debt and the successor agency long-term debt. And with that, I'll turn it over to Annie.
Good afternoon, my name is Annie, and I like to go through all the statement of net positions and some of the items within the financial statements. For the statement of net position, you can find that on page 24 of the CAFR. It presents all information on the assets and deferred outflows of resources, all liabilities, deferred outflows of inflows of resources, and the difference between these categories is known as a net position of the city. The statement of net position is the equivalent of the balance sheet in governmental funds. Over time, increases or decreases in net position may serve as a useful indicator of whether the city's financial position is improving or deteriorating. As you can see in the chart above, the net position for fiscal year 2018 was $3.939 billion. And in fiscal 2019, the net position was at $4.054 billion. And this represents a difference of an increase of $115 million as compared to the net position from 2018. So the statement of net position has improved, as we can see, from fiscal year 2018 to 2019. On the next page, this is where we capture all the city's revenues and expenses. The statement of activities of revenues and expenses can be found on page 9 of your CAFR. This is on a government-wide basis. Total revenues back in 2018 was at $2.215 billion, and in 2019 we have about $2.496 billion, which represents an increase of $281 million, which is equivalent to 13% as compared to the prior year. So revenue is pretty healthy for the city. In terms of expenses, in fiscal year 2018, the expenses total $2.422 billion, and in 2019, expenses total $2.381 billion. This represents a decrease of $41 million, which is good. A decrease in expenses means the city is doing well, and that represents about 2% as compared to the prior year. Okay. This chart shows a general fund comparison where this chart represents what the GAAP fund balance is at the beginning as well as at the end of 2019. The gap fund balance at the end of 2019 was $415 million, and the budgetary fund balance at the end of fiscal year 2019 was $365 million. So the difference between the budgetary to gap is $50 million, and this represents encumbrances of approximately $49.7 million and unrealized gain in fair market value of investment of $300,000. And I'd like to talk about GASB. David, our external auditors, has helped us with the implementation of GASB 83 as well as GASB 88. So these are the new pronouncements that were implemented in the city in fiscal year 2019. GASB 83, certain asset retirement obligation. The statement requires the city to evaluate assets net book value and adjust it annually to reflect the asset's realizable value. GASB 83 did not have an impact on the city's financial statements in fiscal year 2019. In terms of GASB 88, this was a lot of work for our city attorney's office because it requires us to do certain disclosures related to debt, including borrowings and direct placements. This statement requires additional disclosure of unused lines of credit, assets pledged as collateral for the debt, terms specified in debt agreements related to significant events of default with finance-related consequences, significant termination events with finance-related consequences, and significant subjective acceleration clause be disclosed in the footnotes. Finance worked very closely with our city attorney's office in providing the GASB 88 disclosures in our fiscal year 2019 CAFR. With regards to any upcoming GASB pronouncements, we're looking ahead in the future. For fiscal year 2020, we're gonna have to implement GASB 84. This is relating to fiduciary activities, as well as GASB 90, relating to majority equity interest. GASB will be giving us more guidance, and with the help of our external auditor, we'll be able to implement these two GASBs in 2020. More importantly, in fiscal year 2021, we're gonna see a new GASB which is gonna have a huge impact on the city, and this is GASB 87 on leases. This new GASB pronouncement will require us to work very closely with all the departments in the city. We'll have to collaborate with the departments throughout the city to collect and compile data on all leases and report on our fiscal year 2021 CAFR. The Finance Department is commencing exploration of software tools that may exist in the tracking and monitoring to ensure ongoing GASB 87 compliance. And lastly, GASB 89. This is reporting on interest costs incurred before the end of construction period. And this GASB is probably going to impact airports' financial statements more so than the cities. With that, I'd like to turn over the presentation back to our Finance Director, Julia Cooper.
Okay, thank you. So we've combined item 3 and 4 together. The item 4 is the report to those charged with governance. So that's a report that's required by auditing standards, that the auditors are required to communicate information to the city council as a governing body and to city management. It's their responsibilities under generally accepted accounting standards and an overview of the plan, scope, and timing of the audit. So David will now talk about the findings from the audit.
Okay, so in the current year, we had 2 findings. So the report to those charged with governance is more than the findings. It also reports required communications, just letting you know how the audit went. It's our way of communicating to you beyond just the opinion letter that accompanies the financial statements. So included in this report are what we observed during the audit, which we had 2 findings. One related to internal controls over a financial reporting process. Last year, we also had a finding similar to that, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But there's been a huge improvement, I think, in the close. There was one item, though, that we identified during the close that we felt needed to be addressed. You know, the Clean Energy Fund had a it's a new operation, and it had an adjustment that we feel requires some attention in terms of preventing unreported liabilities in the future. So we commented on that. The reason it says material weakness is we look at the major funds individually, and so something like the amount of $6 million may not be real material to the general fund or to the some of the government-wide financial statements, but to this fund it was pretty significant, and so we reported it as a material weakness because the amount is material to that specific fund. The second finding that we had is what we call a significant deficiency. It's less severe than a material weakness, but it's something that needs attention, and that was the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So you may be familiar that the city receives a lot of federal assistance, and through those federal award programs, they need to be audited once a year, and there's a specific process to that. And the FEMA grant, the money that came through the FEMA grant, had a lot of changes during the process, and we felt that if the department that was responsible for that grant had some accounting help, that they could provide more reliable numbers during the process. And so we had two findings there to report. And then on the next slide is our status of prior year findings. So we always follow up on the previous year's findings and let you know if it's been corrected or if it's an ongoing issue. And so really happy to report that 4 of the 5 have been corrected, and 1 is in the process, and that was because of the schedule finding that we had this year. But the financial reporting finding that we had during the close, which was, I think, the cause last year of just the timing of issuing the financial statement. So this year, the finance department was much more timely and did a really good job closing the books, had a lot less closing entries that were outside of the norm. And so we were really happy with the progress that the city finance department made. We felt like the audit went really well this year. The CFA also, the number 2, had much improvement, although we noted the one finding this year with specifically to the FEMA grant. So I think that process has improved since last year, but we only listed as partially corrected based on this year's finding. And then the next 3 all relate to IT-related matters, and the city has made a lot of progress in that area, and last year it was almost on the cusp. There was a lot of change and new personnel in that department, but it wasn't quite ready yet for us to say it was corrected last year. So we went back through with, we have internal specialists that we use that have specific knowledge of IT software and hardware, and we brought them in to evaluate the corrective action, and we felt like we could represent that those findings have been corrected this year.
So as part of the report, management responds to the findings, much like in an internal audit. So with finding number 1, the management agrees with the finding, and we've already taken steps towards corrective action with respect to adding an overstrength senior accountant in the community energy department and continuing to assist the department, finance assisting the community energy department in evaluating their long-term accounting staffing needs for consideration in the 2021 budget process. And then the second one, we concur with the finding with respect to federal awards. We want to make a note that the finding is not in violation of any of the federal grant covenants. And we will be introducing a new reconciliation procedures for grant expenses with departments. So we're really, as part of the budget process that was approved for fiscal year 20, we got 2 new accountants added to the department, so they're being trained up. So those additional staffing resources will help us really work on some of these compliance issues. So in summary, the recommendation is to accept these draft reports, which will be final when they get transmitted to the City Council for the December 10th meeting, and to have those agendized for that meeting. So as I mentioned, the final copies will be posted on the agenda website for the 10th of December, and all the members of the council will receive hard copies of these 2 reports as well. So with that, we're open to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions from my colleagues? None popping up. I had, well, first off, thank you as well. As you said, typically we are in a rush, so we do appreciate being able to see this earlier. Is it traditional, I don't recall from last year, for the management response to go into the this, well, what's the,
The
it doesn't have a
report to
title,
those-
it just says,
Oh, report to those who govern?
that one, yeah.
Yes, that's the customary approach here, a little different from when an internal auditor, where it's a separate memo.
Okay.
It's included in the body of the report.
Okay, yeah, it was initially missed when we were looking for it.
Oh, okay.
Because just, you know, in relation to the 99% of the other audits we
those we
get,
see
we
that's
get it, we
attached
get a
to the back,
separate
yeah.
attachment.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I want to actually recommend a change for that. If this is how it's, you know, supposed to be in typical, it may be helpful though to either, if, you know, because this body's going to change, and I think that procedure is probably going to stay the same, and with our other audit responses.
So what we can do, Councilmember, is make sure that when we do the transmittal memo to it, to highlight that the management responses are embedded in the actual report. So then that'll give direction to the council. Or we can highlight out the responses in the staff report that's on the top to make it clear.
Something to make it clear. Yeah,
We'll
I
do
don't necessarily
that.
want to dictate what that is, but it wasn't clear, I'll tell you that
Okay.
much, right? And so when I looked, I thought that was only the report of the audit, and then finally noticed afterwards that there had management response section. But it's sort of, the way that was embedded, it didn't, you know, it just wasn't intuitive, mainly because that's not how we received the rest of
Yeah.
our audit responses.
So
That's why it wasn't intuitive, so.
We could provide some wayfinding.
Okay, and then back to, we can get to the CAFRA here.
Are you going to refer to a specific page number?
Well, not the entire, not the overview of the, the report, no. Here we go. It's more in general, so you'll be all right with that. This is in regards to, what was this? Yes. In regards to a sentence on page 3 of this is the memo that you had written,
Okay.
where you're describing, and you described it in the presentation as well. But it sounded, and maybe you can go back a slide, or no, actually several slides. It was where the net change, where the kind of the bar graph one. Not that one. That one, net position. Thank you. So, it sounded significant in regards to a trend of saying, hey, you know, if we're showing an increase here, but the way that I was reading on the bottom of page 3 didn't sound like, well, I don't know, it sounded like the way that we achieved some of these numbers may have been just in the way that, I don't know, it says, I'll read the sentence. The decrease resulted from changes of assumptions and differences between expected and actual actuarial experience. That is not a sentence that I understand well. And so what to me, the way that I interpret it was that when I hear actuarial, I think of an assumption. Maybe that's wrong. And so I was just thinking, well, okay, this was a change in maybe some assumptions. But then in the presentation, you mentioned that this, you know, net position in the change in an increase could be an indicator of something positive. And so if you can describe that a little more in regards to what really happened here with this, you know, the net pension liability, this decrease in what looks like a deferred outflow and deferred inflow. You can just dive a little bit more into that to make it actually relevant for me as to why I should be, and if we should be, you know, looking positively upon this net position.
Okay, so net position really is comprehensive, includes assets, deferred outflows of resources, liabilities, and deferred inflow of resources, so it's comprehensive. On the memo that we highlighted, the last bullet point, it says as of June 30, 2019, total net OPEB liability was $923 million, which included $840 million in governmental activities and $82 million in business-type activities. So the total net, this is just OPEB liability, so this is not the total net position of the city. The total net OPEB liability decreased by $148 million, or 13.8%, due to changes of benefits and assumptions in both plans.
So if you can pause right there, but this does play into how we get to the net position, or no?
It's
Yes,
part
because you're
of
saying the
it.
net position is comprehensive. And am
Yes.
I right then to assume what I'm reading here in regards to some of the pension liability changes was that these were from assumptions? right? So, right, and I guess it still could be positive outcome if but I just, in my mind, I was thinking if it's just a difference from what the assumption was, is that really, I don't know, a net positive there, but.
So let me try if I can help. When we say that we've calculated those numbers using actuarial assumptions, those are those actuarial studies that we receive from Chiron. And they're updated every year to help us measure our liabilities and the assets that are matched to it. And so those are describing the movements in the actuarially calculated assets and liabilities associated with pensions and OPEB. They both feed into our net position. And one thing that is relatively novel this year is our net position increased because our revenues have increased and our spending has stayed relatively flat. Normally what's happened in previous CAFRs is both have increased and we don't recognize a change in net position, or at least a positive change. And so that's one of the differences you see today. Did that help?
It does, yeah. It's all of this, even the other recommendation I was going to give is the actual, I think, acronym that we use for GASB. Even that, right? I think it would be helpful to have before we use the acronym, a descriptor in the front of these presentations. We don't deal with this every single day, right? So just to have even those in themselves, detailed, it could even be with a short paragraph of what they may be. Because when we do look at this, we're looking at it, unless somebody here has got the tremendous finance background, right? We're looking at it with the different lens. So in this regard, I just wasn't, it sounded good, and I wasn't certain if it really was. It sounds like it is, and it sounds like it's a lot more factors than just what these pension, liabilities are. That actually, right, a major part of it, as you just described, has to do with actually a stagnancy in spending, but an increase in revenues, and that is a major factor, and that is a positive thing, right, with our net position. So.
Correct, and this slide is to show you the major components that move every year that feed into net position.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions or comments from my colleagues, then we'll take a motion, and this is on items then D3 and D4. Yeah, so a motion for both items.
Does that get cross-referenced?
Yes, these do get cross-referenced. Both of them get cross-referenced?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, both get cross-referenced, yeah. Do we have a date for those?
The 10th.
We do, the 10th, for both, December 10th. So we have motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Both of those pass, and now we're on to the final D5, our comprehensive annual debt report.
I could do it.
Is this known as the CABR?
It's known as the CATR, yeah. So the CATR,
CATR.
the CAFR. We just
CAFR.
love acronyms in
CAFR.
finance because everything's so long and confusing. So again, this report historically has gone in conjunction with the CAFR straight to council. So it's been 6 years since we presented this directly to the committee before taking it on to city council. So today I have Joe Gray with me, who's the city's debt administrator and manages the program, along with Lisa Titano, our assistant director. So are you pulling up that presentation? Okay, well, we can just, you have them in do you have them in your packet? Maybe we can I can just keep going so as not to detain you. So on slide number 2.
We do have it up on our screen.
Okay, perfect. So I'll just keep talking then. So the debt management program includes kind of 3 major categories: debt issuance, debt administration, and then what we call financial advisory services that we provide to the organization. And those are all provided within the policy objectives of the debt management policy, which is approved by the city, has been approved by the city council and is updated periodically. The next slide, on slide 3, shows the city's outstanding debt that's issued by all agencies. It excludes the multifamily housing revenue bonds, which are conduit debt. pension, OPEB, and other city liabilities. So these are really just purely what we consider debt obligations. So as of June 30th, the amount outstanding for the city was $3.84 billion. But as I said, this graph excludes the multifamily housing revenue bonds, which as of that date, June 30, included $772 million outstanding. So it is a sizable portion of the debt and activity that we do monitor as well. We didn't include the tax revenue and anticipation note that was issued at the beginning of fiscal year 2019 in July, which would have been July of 2018, because it was paid in the same fiscal year. So it was money in and money out in the same year. So our outstanding debt as of the end of June was approximately $84 million less than the prior year, and that was a result of both regularly scheduled principal payments and some payoff of some debt. So the biggest piece of outstanding debt is the successor agency refunding bonds, which constitutes 41%. The airport's the next biggest piece at 32%. And then we have the financing authority at 13%, GEO bonds, and then also some other land secured and sewer revenue representing approximately 6%. So, and just to, as a note, this was the debt that was outstanding as of June 30, so it doesn't include the GEO debt and the refunding that we did in July of this year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
All right, thank you, Julia. So the debt issued for last fiscal year 18-19, totaled $640 million. And as Julia mentioned before, the tax revenue anticipation note of $150 million was done in July of 2018 and again paid within the same fiscal year. We issued subordinate wastewater notes for the regional wastewater facility. This is on slide 4. We issued several we've issued lease revenue commercial paper notes for several projects, which we'll go into later. That totals about $46 million. We've issued commercial paper notes for the airport and their expansion project with the new terminals in Terminal B. And then we had a multifamily housing revenue obligation of $318 million. So when you add that to the $71 million that we issued for the wastewater revenue notes, that comes to $640 million for that fiscal year. For this fiscal year, also issued and planned is going to be $815 million. The bulk of that, $500 million that we issued in July of this year, was for $500 million approximately. And that was a combination of new money from Measure T and then also GEO refunding. We will issue bonds, lease revenue bonds, if approved by council, for the ICE Center expansion project. We'll have projects for utilizing lease revenue commercial paper notes, and we'll have various multifamily housing revenue obligation bonds that are conduit issuance in fiscal year 1920. The debt administration programs is slide 5. Well, we're up. Okay, great. Our variable rate exposure, most of the portfolio is in fixed rate, but the variable rate exposure has been reducing in recent years. Rates have been low since 2008, but they're increasing with the Fed increases. There's a trickle-down effect between taxable, tax-exempt, so they run, in a sense, hand in hand. The city's commercial paper was extended this past fiscal year, actually at the beginning of this fiscal year, to 3.5 years, and it's going to expire in February 2022. And the amount of the CP program for various city projects has been expanded from $85 million to $125 million. Commercial paper notes were used to purchase the Convention Center South Hall in the amount of $42.4 million. We've issued commercial paper notes for flood issuance this fiscal year, $3.8 million. And to come will be the City Hall campus expansion. We have authorization to issue $6.5 million, and that'll be for the Department of Clean Energy as they expand. As Julie mentioned earlier, we provide financial advisory services to various departments throughout the city. Major projects include the general obligation bond issuance of 2019, the sale of the Hayes Mansion property. We use those proceeds to redeem the Series 2008 C&D bonds that were outstanding at the time. We use commercial paper to purchase the South Hall Convention Center site, so there was a lot of work done in that. We've issued a request for proposal for the feasibility consultant related to the Ice Center expansion project, and offered financial advice and support in Clean Energy's securing of their standby letter of credit agreement. The city's credit ratings remain strong. The highest you could achieve is obviously AAA. We are one notch below that. So for Moody's, we have it at AA1, and for S&P and Fitch, respectively, they are AA+, so one notch below the highest. The city's lease revenue bonds are one notch below the city's GO, and they're essentially AA2 and AA3 or AA. Essentially, that's the rating from all three rating agencies of Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. The airport bonds are rated at A2 and A, and we just got an upgrade from Fitch in September of this year to take us from A- to A, so that was a recent improvement. Our SARA senior tax allocation bonds are rated AA, and the subordinate tax allocation bonds are rated AA- for both S&P and Fitch. And Julie will summarize.
Yeah, so in summary, the debt management program continues to be highly active in the areas of issuance, administration, and advisory services to departments across the city. We continue to maintain this strong and dedicated program that protects the city's financial interest, our credit ratings, and the long-term management of debt compliance to minimize financial penalties. And the failure to comply with regulatory requirements can result in significant penalties. So we take the work that we do here pretty seriously. So our recommendation is to accept the report and then to cross-reference it to the City Council for December 10th. And you'll receive a hard copy of this report as well when we distribute the CAFR to the full council next week. So with that, we're open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions from my colleagues?
Move to approve and cross-reference.
We have a motion with a cross-reference and a second. The only thing I recall on occasion we have seen a comparison of some of our ratings to other major cities. I don't know if it was in different conversations when we've seen that. When do we do that, or when do we get a look at that?
We can include that as a slide in the presentation to the full council on December 10th.
It would be helpful. I
okay.
do recall seeing that in the past and seeing
Yeah, I
that we
think the
rate.
mayor's asked some questions about that.
Yeah.
Would you like a comparison to the top 10 big cities in the country, or?
That would be helpful, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll do that.
And I recall in the past us rating very highly
we do.
compared to
We
those
do
cities. So,
compare.
yeah, that's why I just think it's helpful, and it touts your work to show, as you just stated in your last sentence, how seriously you take the role. So
we'll add
congratulations.
a slide.
Thank you. We have motion and second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. We have motion accepted. We are into open forum, but I do not have any cards, so we are adjourned. Thank you.